Legendary singer Elvis Presley is facing a legal battle now over a potential foreclosure sale.
For more than a decade, Nancy Rooks was a name few paid attention to, yet she was present in every corner of Elvis Presley's life, the man the world called the King of Rock and Roll. As a housekeeper at Graceland from 1967 until after Elvis's death, she lived quietly, discreetly, never speaking out or revealing anything, even as the whole of America and the global press relentlessly probed into the mysteries surrounding Elvis's sudden death in 1977. To many, Nancy was just a minor witness, a faint shadow behind the grand stage of a legend. But 45 years later, before her passing in 2022, this very woman uttered a sentence that shook the image of Elvis to its core. It's time to tell everything. And she did without noise, without accusation, but with a wealth of information that made those who thought they truly knew Elvis question themselves, did we ever really know him at all? Her words didn't destroy the legend's image, but they gave it layers, making it more complex and perhaps more painful. In this video, we'll delve into what Nancy revealed, and more importantly, what she kept silent about for decades. Part 1. The real life behind the spotlight. Graceland. Elvis Presley's famous mansion in Memphis is often described as a symbol of success and glory. However, for Nancy Rooks, the housekeeper who worked there from 1967 until after Elvis's death, Graceland was a daily workplace where she observed the personal life of a man who the world only knew through his public image. Over more than a decade of service at Graceland, Nancy gained a close and ongoing view of Elvis, not as a famous star, but as an individual with habits, moods, and a lifestyle that was constantly in flux. As Nancy recounted it on several occasions, life at Graceland followed a unique rhythm, largely revolving around Elvis's irregular schedule. He often stayed up late sometimes until dawn and demanded food at hours when others had already retired. Nancy would prepare dishes like cornbread, bacon, or desserts at 2 or 3 a.m., a routine that became the norm rather than the exception. This highlighted Elvis's off-kilter lifestyle and how everyone in the house, including the staff, had to adapt to his schedule. Unlike the image of a public star, Elvis in Nancy's eyes was much more reclusive. She noted that he spent much of his time in the private areas of Graceland, particularly the second floor where few were allowed to go. He tended to live inwards, and his emotional shifts from joyful and energetic to quiet and distant often happened rapidly. For Nancy, this was not unusual. It was simply part of the daily life at Graceland. During her time working at Graceland, Nancy's role extended beyond cooking and cleaning. She also prepared clothing, took care of personal items, helped organize activities in the house, and sometimes even assisted Elvis in changing his clothes when he was in a hurry. Through this, she interacted with Elvis, not just through her work, but through the small details of his private life, his favorite foods, personal hygiene habits, and preferences. She once noted that Elvis was very particular about cleanliness, often showering multiple times a day, and had specific requests for how his meals should be prepared. One of the most striking aspects Nancy observed was the split personality in Elvis's behavior over time. In the final years of his life, Elvis showed signs of physical decline. He gained weight, irregularly, seemed fatigued often, and would retreat into his private space. Nancy wasn't a doctor, but she clearly noted changes in his behavior and lifestyle. Elvis slept very little sometimes, only a few hours each night. he would wake up looking exhausted, sometimes skipping breakfast, and often needed help with even the smallest daily tasks. However, no one at Graceland officially questioned these behaviors. Like many in support roles for major celebrities, Nancy's job wasn't to analyze or intervene, but to respond and assist. So despite noticing Elvis's health problems, she, like many others, simply carried on with her work as usual. The abnormality gradually became part of everyday life at Graceland. The mansion, famous for impromptu parties and gatherings with friends, family and members of the Memphis Mafia, the informal group of close associates around Elvis, also frequently fell into a subdued state. The atmosphere in the house was largely dependent on Elvis's mood, a highly unpredictable factor, according to Nancy. A key point in Nancy's account is that she did not view Elvis as a legendary figure, but as an individual living in an unhealthy environment. She didn't pass judgment, but her descriptions of his eating, living, and resting habits, or lack of rest, showed a lifestyle that lacked control. When Elvis was sad or didn't want to talk, everyone respected his silence. No one proactively discussed his health or suggested any changes. This laid the foundation for the doubts Nancy later voiced in her final confessions. Elvis's health decline was not sudden. It was a prolonged process, an ongoing series of signs that those around him saw but did not intervene with. Nancy did not blame anyone, but according to her, the collective silence may have contributed to Elvis's worsening condition. Much of the information in Nancy's memoir and account is not meant to shock, but to offer a realistic view of life inside Graceland, a closed environment where the behavior and mood of one individual dictated the entire household's activities. And in that environment, although she was an outsider, Nancy witnessed Elvis's transformation day by day, from a man full of energy to someone who withdrew, grew tired, and lost connection with the outside world. Nancy's final confession that Elvis did not die suddenly but wilted bit by bit was not just emotional. It was formed from over 10 years of continuous observation in that environment. And because of this observation, when she finally spoke, Nancy's words could not be ignored. Part 2, From Housekeeper to Historical Witness. Throughout her time working at Graceland, Nancy Rooks' role continuously expanded. Starting with cooking and cleaning, she gradually took on more responsibilities directly related to Elvis Presley's personal life. She prepared his performance, clothes, cleaned his private rooms, and even helped him change clothes or arrange his medication and personal hygiene items daily. These tasks placed Nancy in the position of a direct and frequent witness to the life of one of the most famous figures in America at the time. Unlike managers, doctors, or band members, Nancy worked in the background, a space where there was no media presence and no obligation to follow public relations strategies. She saw Elvis from morning to late at night, often being the first to greet him after he woke up and the last to see him before he retired to his private room. This constant presence gave her a deeper understanding of what others might not see, from his eating habits to his fluctuating mental state at different times. Over the years, Nancy didn't act as an advisor or manager, but she became part of Elvis's inner circle, a group with access to his private space. This wasn't openly declared, but it was evident in the small details of daily life. Elvis trusted her with his performance, clothes, his personal items, and showed no defensiveness when she appeared during sensitive moments, such as when he was tired, irritable, or anxious. This was a level of trust that not all staff members had. One noteworthy aspect of Nancy's account is the lack of intervention in important decisions, even though she clearly observed Elvis's health and psychological instability. According to her, Elvis would often change his mood. At times, he would be friendly and enthusiastic, but at other times, he would become silent and withdraw from communication. However, there was never any real conversation between Elvis and those around him about mental health or lifestyle changes. Everyone, including Nancy, adhered to an unspoken rule: respect Elvis's space and never ask questions. This reflects the unique power structure within Graceland, a system revolving around one individual where staff, employees, and friends all played a supporting role rather than a controlling one. In this environment, Nancy, despite being trusted, had no position to intervene. But this only reinforced her role as a purely observational witness. She didn't manipulate events, didn't make decisions, but simply observed and did her job. Over time, Nancy noticed a clear change in Elvis. He became increasingly tired, demanded food at odd hours, showed signs of being distracted, and even needed help with simple tasks like choosing clothes or remembering his daily schedule. These details gradually created a more imperfect picture of the musical icon the public had known. However, in official documents or previous interviews, Nancy had never specifically spoken about these things until the later years of her life. What makes Nancy's role so significant in uncovering the truth about Elvis is not that she had access to official documents, but because she witnessed the process of normalizing the abnormal in his life. In her account, Elvis frequently requested medication, not due to acute pain, but as part of his routine. On any given day, there could be 3 to 4 empty pill bottles in the bathroom trash. However, no one in the house considered this a problem that needed intervention. Nancy also participated in preparations when guests visited, including officials, artists, or reporters coming to Graceland. According to her, when outsiders were present, the whole atmosphere immediately became normalized. Elvis would appear cheerful and lively, and any signs of exhaustion were carefully hidden. In moments like these, Nancy's job was to maintain order, ensuring nothing was revealed. To the public, Graceland was a place filled with light and music. For those inside, it was a place that had to function to maintain the image. Unlike the members of the Memphis Mafia, the group of friends, bodyguards, and assistants, Nancy didn't live in the same relaxed pace or with the social interactions surrounding Elvis. She approached everything from the background. Therefore, when she began to speak about the details that had never been disclosed after decades of silence, the Elvis research community immediately took notice. Her account was not influenced by the media or commercial goals. She wasn't writing a book to shock the public, nor was she seeking fame through interviews. She only spoke in her final years when her health had deteriorated and when there was no ulterior motive other than the need to clear her conscience. Nancy's access to private spaces, the bathroom, and hidden areas within Graceland was rare, not only because of Elvis's strict privacy policies, but also because he was known for fiercely guarding his personal space. This placed Nancy in the unique position of continuously observing a reality that contrasted with what the public knew. And that is why her final revelations, though not many and not sensational, have had such a profound impact. She was there when much of the truth took shape, and she had enough time to understand what needed to be said and what needed to be kept silent. Part 3. The Mysterious Death. The morning of August 16, 1977, began like any other morning at Graceland, at least on the surface. But according to Nancy Rooks, it was a morning full of small details that didn't quite add up. And looking back, she realized these were signs that something unusual was about to happen. Elvis Presley had stayed up late as usual. The night before, he had played ping pong and chatted with his fiancée Ginger Alden and his cousin Billy Smith. Around dawn, he left the entertainment area and returned to the main house. At that time, Nancy was in the kitchen. She met him on the stairs. He appeared tired, but was still polite, declining breakfast and only asking for a glass of water. "I'm not hungry, I just want to sleep a little," he said. Nancy handed the task of giving him water to Pauline, another housekeeper, and went back to her usual work. This seemingly trivial exchange later became one of the final moments when people in the house saw Elvis awake. Pauline later recalled that Elvis took the water unusually quickly and with noticeable tension. He drank it rapidly as if he were extremely thirsty. This was not typical behavior, but at the time, Nancy and the other staff didn't think much of it. The weather was hot and he had just played sports, so feeling tired was understandable. However, in later interviews, Nancy admitted that this moment, the way he drank the water and the way he declined breakfast, remained particularly vivid in her memory. Around 9:30 a.m., Nancy heard a loud noise from upstairs. It wasn't a heavy fall, but it was certainly an odd sound in a house where she had become familiar with every footstep. She paused, listened, but there was no cry for help. No further noise, no one called out. After a few minutes with no other disturbances, she continued her work. This period of silence, later, became one of the most debated points. Was Elvis's fall at that time, and was the time gap from then until he was discovered too long? By nearly 1:50 p.m., the intercom rang. It was Ginger Alden, her voice trembling and almost unintelligible. "Who's down there?" "Something's wrong up here." That was the moment everything changed. Nancy immediately asked, "What's happening?" but only received crying in response. Understanding that this was not a small issue, Nancy immediately abandoned her work and rushed upstairs. What she saw in the bathroom was the first image she would never forget. Elvis lying face down on the floor, unresponsive. No one was screaming. There was no chaos, just a heavy silence and a palpable sense that the situation had spiraled out of control. Nancy did not check his pulse or breath. This was not her role, but immediately ran downstairs to call the Memphis Mafia, Elvis's closest associates. Within minutes, everyone arrived and the ambulance was called. When the medical team arrived, they were unsure how to navigate through the vast estate. Nancy led the way, showing them the stairs, helping them lift the stretcher through narrow hallways and around tight corners. This is a detail Nancy remembers very clearly, not because it was emotionally significant, but because it was the last time she saw Elvis being taken out of Graceland, not to perform, but to be rushed in a futile attempt to save him. After being brought downstairs, Elvis was described as looking like he was sleeping. However, medical personnel determined he had passed away some time earlier. The blue discoloration on his face showed that blood circulation had ceased long enough for the skin to change color. This further raised questions about the time gap from 9:30 a.m. to 1:50 p.m., a gap that remains one of the biggest mysteries to this day. Right after Elvis's death, Graceland became chaotic. The press quickly arrived and fans gathered at the front gates. Inside, however, the close-knit team and staff were split between handling their emotions and protecting Elvis's public image. The official statement later reported that the cause of death was a heart attack, no signs of foul play. But observers and later fans began to question the details of the report. In all the events that morning, Nancy's role was that of an observer and a task doer, nothing more, nothing less. But what she saw and felt during those crucial hours made her believe that many things had been overlooked or had never been made public. Her silence lasted for many years, partly out of loyalty, partly because no one had ever asked about the role of a housekeeper in the death of an icon. But before she passed away, Nancy made it clear what she witnessed that day didn't completely align with the official accounts later published. What is important is not whether Nancy had concrete evidence, but that she was there continuously from start to finish. And as she herself said, "I don't need to investigate. I lived at the crime scene." That statement affirms her unique position as an observer and is why when she finally spoke, the public had to listen. Part 4. What Nancy didn't say. After Elvis Presley's death, a multitude of books, articles, and documentaries emerged with the aim of uncovering what had happened inside Graceland on that fateful day. But among the many witnesses, only one person maintained absolute silence for decades: Nancy Rooks. As a close housekeeper, Nancy refrained from making comments, engaging in public debates, or capitalizing on her connection to Elvis for fame. For nearly 20 years after his death, she almost never appeared in the media. It wasn't until the 1990s that Nancy published a memoir titled Inside Graceland, Elvis's Maid Remembers. The book was written in a nostalgic, gentle tone, focusing on everyday details, Elvis's favorite foods, household habits, and the unique atmosphere inside Graceland. The book was well received by fans for not exploiting sensationalism. However, what was most striking was what was not mentioned. There were no details about the day Elvis died, no commentary on the cause of death, or the reactions of those involved. When asked about her silence, Nancy simply responded, "I respect the family." For many years, that answer was seen as a sign of loyalty. But in her later years, Nancy's perspective began to shift. In private conversations with close friends, she started to admit that there was still a part of the truth that had never been revealed. It wasn't out of fear, but because she wasn't sure the public was ready to hear it. More importantly, she didn't want to be the one to initiate a wave of criticism against someone she had once respected, even though that very respect was also the source of her internal conflict. According to those close to Nancy, she would often respond with hesitation when anyone mentioned Elvis's death. She could be having a normal conversation, but when the subject of August 16, 1977 came up, her gaze would drop, her tone would change, and she would often change the subject. On one rare occasion, she said, "If people knew what I know, they wouldn't listen to his music the same way anymore." The remark wasn't accusatory, but it was enough to suggest that something serious had happened, and it remained unresolved. The ambiguity in Nancy's account and her behavior led many to question, had she witnessed or known about something unusual on the morning Elvis died? Were their actions taken behind the scenes to protect his image before the authorities arrived at the scene? In this context, Nancy's silence became more than just an act of respect. It began to add to the suspicion. Notably, she never confirmed any theories. but she also never completely denied them. In rare interviews, when asked about the medication in Graceland, she would simply say, "I'm just the housekeeper." But friends and a few people who had worked with her confirmed that Nancy had admitted that there were things that weren't right after Elvis was found unconscious in the bathroom. She never specified who was involved, but on one occasion she said that she did what was asked and didn't think too much about it at the time. This situation opened up another possibility. Perhaps Nancy was asked to adjust the scene before the emergency services arrived. Not to conceal evidence, but to save face. According to one old friend, she once mentioned that she wiped a surface, moved a towel, or tidied a few items. Not much, but enough to change the original layout of the room. In the context of a sudden death of a famous figure, such small actions could lead to differing conclusions. However, Nancy did not see this as intentional wrongdoing. "I didn't know what I was covering up," she was quoted as saying. "I just did what I always do when guests arrive, you tidy up a bit." From this perspective, Nancy didn't make a mistake, but her presence at the scene, just before the emergency team arrived, made her account a crucial link in establishing the true timeline. Over time, the unspoken things began to accumulate. As she grew older, Nancy frequently mentioned the feeling of carrying a burden. She didn't use the word guilt, but it was clear she was not entirely at peace. The regret didn't stem from witnessing Elvis's death, but from the feeling that she had contributed to hiding or obscuring part of the truth, albeit unintentionally. In a conversation in 2021, just a year before her passing, Nancy said, "I did right by the family, but now I think maybe I did wrong by the truth." That statement reflected an inner conflict that had lasted for decades between loyalty to the deceased and her moral duty to the public. And that is why, in the end, she said, "It's time to tell everything." Part 5. The Final Confession. I just did what I was told. For more than 40 years after Elvis Presley's death, Nancy Rooks rarely spoke in detail about the final moments at Graceland. However, in 2022, not long before her passing, Nancy made a brief, pivotal statement: "It's time to tell everything." This comment wasn't accompanied by an official interview or a new book. Instead, it was relayed through long-time acquaintances, those who had believed Nancy would carry her secrets to the grave. But this time, she had changed her mind. According to those close to her, Nancy became more introspective and candid in her final months. In a private conversation, she shared that she could no longer keep silent because some things should be understood more than hidden. She didn't accuse anyone, nor did she make specific claims about the cause of death, but there was one point she repeatedly emphasized: "I did what I was told. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Now I think I should say it." Nancy's confession mainly revolved around the short period between when Elvis was found unconscious in the bathroom and when the ambulance arrived. During this time, according to her, someone, though she didn't know, who told her to tidy up a bit. She didn't view this as an urgent command, nor did she fully understand the consequences. She recalled wiping a surface, folding a towel, and rearranging a few personal items. Just a few small things, she said. But later, when the official report claimed there were no signs of foul play, and independent theories regarding drug use began circulating, the tidying up action took on a new, more significant light. The request for Nancy to clean up before the emergency team arrived also raises a bigger question about the reactions of those around Elvis at the time. Had they deliberately adjusted the scene to protect his public image before authorities arrived? Or was it simply an instinctive act to maintain order amid the chaos, Nancy didn't provide a specific answer. She only emphasized that no one was shouting or giving clear instructions. Everything took place in a tense but calm atmosphere. Nancy's confession did not come with accusations, but it opened a flood of questions that had remained unresolved for 45 years. In Elvis Presley's death report, the cause of death was recorded as heart attack. However many details surrounding his use of medication, the delay in discovering him and calling for help, and the refusal to release the full toxicology report led experts and fans alike to question the official narrative. Nancy's account, though not legally binding, added value to the unresolved aspects. Another significant point in her confession was how she reassessed her role. Nancy never considered herself part of Elvis's Memphis Mafia, the group of close friends and personal assistants, but she knew she had witnessed more than most people. In her later years, as her health declined, she seemed to feel the pressure of carrying an unresolved part of the story. A friend recalled Nancy once saying, "I can't carry this to my grave." However, she didn't want the truth to be exploited negatively. The reason she spoke wasn't to damage Elvis's image, but to restore honesty in a story that had been heard too one-sidedly for too long. In her final words, she didn't use harsh language. She simply described the details she remembered, small things. But in an unexpected death, every detail mattered. This situation shows that in high-profile historical and media contexts, sometimes the most ordinary actions can have consequences far beyond expectations. Nancy wasn't an investigator. She didn't analyze the scene, but she was one of the few who was present during the most critical period from the moment Elvis was discovered to when the emergency team arrived. And because of that, when she spoke, no one could ignore it. Part 6. Death not as a shock, but as exhaustion. One of the most notable perspectives Nancy Rooks shared before her death was that Elvis Presley's passing was not an entirely unexpected shock to those who lived and worked around him. According to her, Elvis's death was the result of a prolonged process with signs visible for a long time, but no one spoke up or took strong enough action to intervene. Her remark, "Elvis didn't die in a moment. He withered away little by little," best encapsulated this view. According to Nancy's account, and that of others who worked at Graceland, Elvis's health had noticeably deteriorated since the early 1970s. The obvious signs included irregular weight gain, chronic insomnia, and an increasing dependence on both prescription and unprescribed drugs. His abnormal schedule, sleeping during the day, waking late in the afternoon, and being active until dawn, became more and more isolated, distancing him from normal social habits. Nancy recalled that the number of empty medicine bottles in Elvis's bathroom trash had increased to alarming levels by the summer of 1977. She described how nearly every day there would be a new bottle discarded. This information aligned with later findings by researchers. In the autopsy report, Elvis had a large amount of sedatives, painkillers, sleeping pills, and stimulants in his system. However, at the time, Nancy was neither in a position nor had the authority to assess or raise concerns about potential drug abuse. She continued her work as usual, just like any other staff member at Graceland. Another detail Nancy noticed was the increased frequency with which Elvis dozed off during daily activities. She had seen him fall asleep in the middle of meals, during conversations, or while watching television. These early signs were initially thought to be symptoms of exhaustion, due to his demanding schedule. But later, Nancy herself admitted that these could have been the consequences of excessive drug use. The general attitude of those around Elvis in his final years also demonstrated a trend of normalizing his abnormal behaviors. Nancy said that no one among the staff or close friends dared to question him or suggest any changes, partly out of loyalty, partly out of fear of being removed from his inner circle. Everyone around him adhered to an unspoken rule: respect Elvis's space and don't ask questions. The increasing isolation was another crucial factor contributing to the worsening of Elvis's health. He appeared in public only during mandatory performances. Even inside the house, he severely limited the number of people who could access his private space on the second floor. According to Nancy, only a very select few were allowed up there, mainly for tasks like cleaning, changing towels, or bringing food. Nancy wasn't directly involved in medical decisions, but through her role, she witnessed how Elvis's medication was managed. She noticed that not all the medicine bottles came from official channels. There were times when she saw unfamiliar bottles that hadn't appeared before, and they would disappear after just a few days. This fit with some later theories posed by researchers and the media, suggesting that by the end, Elvis may have been receiving medication from multiple sources without proper medical supervision. The deteriorating health directly impacted Elvis's performances. Some shows in 1977 were cancelled at the last minute, or the quality was noticeably diminished. The media at the time only mentioned general terms like exhaustion or fatigue, but those within Graceland, including Nancy, understood that the issue ran much deeper. However, no one had the authority or willingness to make a public warning. Nancy also mentioned how Elvis became increasingly distant from his once close friends. She recalled times when he would only interact with a select few individuals for weeks at a time. Instead, he spent most of his time alone or listening to gospel music, a genre he had loved since childhood. Nancy's final confession was not intended to criticize or accuse any individual. She didn't name specific people who provided the drugs or overlooked the warning signs. Instead, she emphasized that this was a collective tragedy where many people saw the problem, but no one took action. As she put it, everyone saw, but no one acted. What gives Nancy's account weight is that she wasn't an outsider making assumptions. She was directly present, observing Elvis during the most crucial period of his life. She didn't see herself as a hero or a victim. She simply said, "I was there, I saw." And that is why, in the end, Nancy's account became an indispensable part of re-evaluating what truly happened inside Graceland, leading up to the fateful day of August 16th, 1977. Part 7. The Legacy in Question. After Nancy Rooks's final words were shared through personal channels, retold by friends and a few individuals who had close contact with her, the public began to reassess Elvis Presley's death with a new layer of questioning. It wasn't because Nancy made shocking revelations, but because her account clarified something that many had long suspected: that Elvis's death wasn't just a personal event, but the culmination of a prolonged decline, surrounded by silence and selective acceptance. The initial reaction from Elvis's fans was divided. Some argued that revisiting unverified details, especially from someone who was neither a doctor nor an investigator, was unnecessary. They cherished Elvis as a musical icon, an artist who dedicated his life to the public, and believed that what happened within his private space should remain untouched. To them, Nancy Rooks should be remembered As the loyal maid she had always been, a role she maintained for decades. However, there was also a substantial group of supporters who appreciated Nancy's courage in speaking out, especially in a context where she had no personal agenda, no new book to sell, no media appearances, and no compensation for revealing the information. Her choice to speak out before her death was seen more as an act of catharsis than as an accusation. For this group, understanding what truly happened in the final years of Elvis's life didn't diminish his legacy. On the contrary, it made it more authentic and human. Academics and biographers also couldn't ignore Nancy's account. Several veteran Elvis journalists and biographers began revisiting the details surrounding his time of death, the emergency procedures, and the toxicology reports issues that had been controversial for decades. Notably, the initial autopsy report had not been fully released to the public. A redacted version only mentioned a heart attack. It wasn't until many years later that some unofficial information revealed that Elvis's body contained over a dozen different drugs at the time of his death. Nancy's story didn't directly challenge any official data, but it refocused attention on the question, why was there a discrepancy between the reality inside Graceland, as described by Nancy, and the public statements? Was it because Elvis's fame was so great that those involved intentionally withheld part of the truth to protect his image? Or was it simply because, at the time, the concepts of mental health and the effects of prescription drugs were not fully understood? Another question arose. Did those around Elvis, including doctors, friends, and assistants, find themselves in a difficult situation between respecting his privacy and the responsibility to intervene? Nancy didn't assign blame to anyone, but what she said showed that many people knew Elvis was in serious trouble, but didn't want or didn't have the authority to speak up. She admitted this herself: "I didn't do anything wrong, but I didn't do anything." The tension between respecting a legend and accepting the full truth about that person is not uncommon in the history of pop culture. Elvis Presley is not the only case. However, with his global influence and near mythical image, anything that reveals the darker sides of his life creates a profound impact. In this context, Nancy's story creates a dilemma if we accept her entire narrative. It means acknowledging that Elvis's legacy was partly built on a foundation of silence. Elvis did not die suddenly. He deteriorated day by day in isolation, exhaustion, and the silent agreement of those around him. And in that silence, Nancy was also a part. But her final confession, though late, was an act of courage, so that we could look at an icon not just through the spotlight, but also through what was concealed behind the doors of Graceland. The question remains, will we dare to face the truth behind a legend that the world once idolized? Or will we continue to remember only the pleasant part and ignore the rest? Thank you for watching until the end of the video. If you find this story thought-provoking, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about Nancy's final words? Is it a truth that needed to be told? Or is it something that should have remained hidden forever?